King Crimson are a progressive rock band. Formed in London in 1968, the band are widely recognized as a foundational progressive rock group. The band have incorporated diverse influences and approaches during their 5-decade history, as well as balancing highly structured compositions against abstract improvisational sections and an interest in pop songs. The band has a large following, despite garnering little radio or music video airplay. With guitarist Robert Fripp as the only consistent member, King Crimson's lineup has persistently altered throughout its existence. 18 musicians and 3 lyricists have passed through the ranks, although the tenure of certain members has sometimes extended for decades. King Crimson's sound has varied according to its instrumentation. Earlier lineups featured prominent saxophone and keyboards, while subsequent lineups replaced this with violin, innovative acoustic or electronic percussion, interlocking guitars or touch-style instruments. The band are notable for continuous engagement with contemporary music technology. In addition to Fripp's extensive work in loop music both in and out of the band, King Crimson pioneered the use of Mellotrons in 1968. Roland Guitar synthesizers, Simmons electronic drums and the Chapman Stick in the 1980s. Dense MIDI processing and the Warr Guitar in the 1990s, and Roland V-Drums in the 21st century. King Crimson's existence has been characterized by regular periods of hiatus. From 1997 until the present day, various subdivisions of King Crimson have continued to pursue aspects of the band's work and approaches via a series of related bands collectively referred to as ProjeKCts. The debut lineup of King Crimson was influential but short-lived, lasting for just over 1 year. It established several of the ground rules of British progressive rock. During 1970 and 1971 a second and unstable lineup struggled to unite disjunctions between increasingly formalized studio work and rougher live incarnations, going through numerous personnel changes while further exploring elements of jazz, funk and chamber music. Establishing a third, stable lineup in 1972, King Crimson developed a European-influenced improvisational sound with elements of hard rock, jazz fusion and a distinctly harsher classical component before breaking up in 1974. A fourth lineup of King Crimson was active between 1981 and 1984, an Anglo-American quartet with new wave pop and gamelan influences. A fifth lineup appeared in 1994, blending aspects of the band's 1980s and 1970s sound with fresh influences from genres such as industrial rock, grunge and loop music. Further lineups of King Crimson have continued to work up until the present day, with the band continuing to incorporate new elements into their music. The current lineup is a 7-piece band with 3 drummers, a saxophonist, flautist, paired guitars, bass and assorted electronic devices. Due to the number of musicians involved in King Crimson over the years, the band is at the hub of a network of other bands and projects, and has been influential to many contemporary musical artists. History, origins. In August 1967, brothers Michael Giles and Peter Giles, who had been professional musicians in various jobbing bands since their mid-teens in Dorset, advertised for a singing organist to join their new project. Fellow Dorset musician Robert Fripp, a guitarist who did not sing responded, and the trio formed the band Giles and Fripp. Based on a format of eccentric pop songs and complex instrumentals, the band recorded several unsuccessful singles and one album, The Cheerful Insanity of Giles and Fripp. The band hovered on the edge of success, with several radio sessions and a television appearance, but never scored the hit that would have been crucial for a commercial breakthrough. The album was no more of a success than the singles, and was even disparaged by Keith Moon of The Who in a magazine review. Attempting to expand their sound, Giles and Fripp then recruited the multi-instrumentalist Ian MacDonald on keyboards, reeds and woodwinds. MacDonald brought along his then-girlfriend, the former Fairport Convention singer Judy Dybel, whose tenure with the group was brief and ended at the same time as her romantic split with MacDonald. More significantly, MacDonald brought in lyricist, roadie and art strategist Peter Sinfield, with whom he had been writing songs. A partnership initiated when MacDonald had said to Sinfield, regarding his 1968 band creation, "Peter, I have to tell you that your band is hopeless, but you write some great words. Would you like to get together on a couple of songs? One of the first songs MacDonald and Sinfield wrote together was The Court of the Crimson King. Fripp, meanwhile, had seen the band 1-2-3 at the Marquee. This band would later inspire some of Crimson's penchant for classical melodies and jazz-like improvisation. Feeling that he no longer wished to pursue Peter Giles' more whimsical pop style, Fripp recommended his friend Greg Lake, a singer and guitarist, for recruitment into the band, with the suggestion that Lake should replace either him or Peter Giles. Although Peter Giles would later sardonically describe this as one of Fripp's cute political moves, he himself had become disillusioned with Giles and Fripp's failure to break through, and stepped down to be replaced by Lake as the band's bass player, singer and frontman. At this point, the band morphed into what would become King Crimson. King Crimson, Lineup 1, the first incarnation of King Crimson, was formed in London on November 30, 1968 and first rehearsed on January 13, 1969. The band name was coined by lyricist Peter Sinfield as a synonym for Beelzebub, Prince of Demons. According to Fripp, Beelzebub would be an anglicized form of the Arabic phrase Beelzebub, meaning the man with a name. Historically and etymologically, a Crimson King was any monarch during whose reign there was civil unrest and copious bloodshed. The album debuted at the height of worldwide opposition to the military involvement of the United States in Southeast Asia. At this point, Ian MacDonald was King Crimson's main composer, albeit with significant contributions from Lake and Fripp, while Sinfield not only wrote all the lyrics but designed and operated the band's revolutionary stage lighting, and was therefore credited with sounds and visions. MacDonald suggested the new band purchase a Mellotron and they began using it to create an orchestral rock sound, inspired by the moody blues. Peter Sinfield, interviewed for Prog Rock Britannia, An Observation in 3 Movements, described Crimson thus: "We had an ethos in Crimson. We just refused to play anything that sounded anything like a Tin Pan Alley record. If it sounded at all popular, it was out. So it had to be complicated, it had to be more expansive chords, it had to have strange influences. If it sounded like too simple, we'd make it more complicated, we'd play it in 7/8 or 5/8, just to show off." King Crimson made their live debut on April 9, 1969, and made a breakthrough by playing the Rolling Stones' free concert at Hyde Park, London in July 1969 before an estimated 500,000 people. In the Court of the Crimson King, the band's debut album, In the Court of the Crimson King, was released in October 1969 on Island Records. Fripp would later describe it as having been an instant smash, and New York's acid album of 1970. The album received public compliments from Pete Townshend, The Who's guitarist, who called the album an uncanny masterpiece. The sound of In the Court of the Crimson King has also been described as setting the antecedent for alternative rock and grunge, whilst the softer tracks are described as having an ethereal, and almost sacred feel. In contrast to the blues-based hard rock of the contemporary British and American scenes, King Crimson presented a more Europeanized approach that blended antiquity and modernity. The band's music drew on a wide range of influences provided by all 5 group members. These elements included Romantic and Modernist-era classical music, the psychedelic rock spearheaded by Jimi Hendrix, folk, jazz, military music, ambient improvisation, Victoriana and British pop. After playing shows in England, the band embarked on a tour of the United States, performing alongside many contemporary popular musicians and musical groups. Their first U.S. show was performed at Goddard College, in Plainfield, Vermont. While their original sound astounded contemporary audiences and critics, creative tensions were already developing within the band. Michael Giles and Ian MacDonald, still striving to cope with King Crimson's rapid success and the realities of life on the road, became uneasy with the band's direction. Although he was neither the dominant composer in the band nor the frontman, Fripp was very much the band's driving force and spokesman, leading King Crimson into progressively darker and more intense musical areas. MacDonald and Giles, now favoring a lighter and more romantic style of music, became increasingly uncomfortable with their position and resigned from the band during the California tour. To salvage what he saw as the most important elements of King Crimson, Fripp offered to resign himself, but MacDonald and Giles declared that the band was more than them, and that they should therefore be the ones to leave. The original lineup played their last show together in San Francisco at the Fillmore West on December 16, 1969. Ian MacDonald and Michael Giles then formally left King Crimson to pursue solo work, recording the semi-successful MacDonald and Giles studio album in 1970 before dissolving their partnership. Live recordings of the original King Crimson's concerts were eventually released 27 years later in 1996 as the double-quadruple live album Epitaph and in the King Crimson Collectors Club releases. From the start of 1970 until mid-1971, King Crimson remained in a state of flux with fluctuating lineups and breakups, thwarted tour plans and difficulties in finding a satisfactory musical direction. Was not properly in place during this time. Greg Lake was the next member to leave, departing in early 1970 after being approached by Keith Emerson to join what would become Emerson, Lake and Palmer. This left Fripp as the only remaining musician in the band, taking on part of the keyboard-playing role in addition to guitar. To compensate, Sinfield increased his own creative role and began developing his interest in synthesizers for use on subsequent records. In the Wake of Poseidon, the band's second album, In the Wake of Poseidon was recorded by a mixture of the remaining members and their former associates. Michael Giles returned to play drums on a session-only basis, joined by his brother Peter Giles on bass. The entire album is based, movement for movement, on the seven-movement orchestral suite The Planets by the English composer Gustav Holst. At one point, the band considered hiring the then-unknown Elton John to be the album's singer, but decided against it. Instead, Lake agreed to sing on the album, covering all of the vocal tracks except Cadence and Cascade, which was sung by Fripp's old-school friend and teenage bandmate Gordon Haskell. Mel Collins contributed saxophones and flute. Another key performer was jazz pianist Keith Tippett, who became an integral part of King Crimson's sound for the next few records. Although Fripp offered him full band membership, Tippett preferred to remain as a studio collaborator and performed live with the band only once. In the Wake of Poseidon was moderately well received on release, but was criticized as sounding very similar in both style and content to the band's debut album, to the point where it seemed like an imitation. Lizard, with In the Wake of Poseidon on sale, Fripp and Sinfield had material and releases to promote, but no band to play them. In considerable desperation, Fripp persuaded Gordon Haskell to join permanently as singer and bass player and also recruited former Shy Limbs Manfred Mann drummer Andy McCulloch. Mel Collins was also retained as a full band member. Both Haskell and McCulloch joined King Crimson in time to participate in the recording sessions for the band's third album, Lizard, but had no say in the writing of the material. Fripp and Sinfield, now effectively equal artistic partners, had written the entire album themselves and had also brought in a squad of jazz musicians to help record it. Keith Tippett, cornet player Mark Charig, trombonist Nick Evans and oboe player Robin Miller. John Anderson of Yes was also brought in to perform vocals on one song which Fripp and Sinfield considered to be outside Haskell's range and style. Lizard featured much stronger avant-garde jazz and chamber classical influences than previous albums, as well as Sinfield's upfront experiments with processing and distorting sound through the VCS-3 synthesizer. It also featured Sinfield's most complex set of elusive lyrics to date, including a coded song about the breakup of the Beatles, with almost the entire second side taken up by a predominantly instrumental chamber suite describing a medieval battle and its outcome. Lizard has subsequently been described as being an acquired taste. It was definitely not to the taste of the more rhythm and blues-oriented Haskell and McCulloch, who did not enjoy the sessions and rapidly became disillusioned. Haskell also realized that he would be playing material that he had no sympathy for, and that he would have no creative input into King Crimson for the foreseeable future. Just prior to the release of Lizard, Haskell quit the band acrimoniously, having refused to sing through distortion and electronic effects for live concerts. McCulloch quit immediately afterwards, later joining Arthur Brown's band and subsequently becoming the drummer for Greenslade in 1972. Fripp and Sinfield were forced to return to the arduous process of auditioning new members. King Crimson, Line-Up 2. The next King Crimson lineup featured Fripp, Sinfield, Collins and drummer Ian Wallace. Auditionees for the role of singer included Brian Ferry, Elton John and the band's manager John Gayden, but the post went to Raymond Boz Burrell, who'd previously worked with his own band Boz People. Fripp approached bass player John Wetton in mid-1971 to complete the lineup, but Wetton declined to accept a place in Family, although he kept in touch with Fripp. Rick Kemp was eventually selected as the new bass player but turned the band down at the last minute. Once again faced with limited choices, Fripp and Wallace taught Boz to play the bass rather than start the search all over again. Although Boz had not played bass before, he had played enough occasional rhythm guitar to make learning the instrument easier. In 1971, King Crimson undertook their first tour since 1969 with the new lineup. The concerts were well received, but the roots-based musical inclinations and rock and roll lifestyle favored by Burrell, Collins and Wallace began to alienate the drug-free, more cerebral Fripp. He began to withdraw socially from his colleagues, creating tension that spread to the rest of the band, although King Crimson completed the tour intact. Islands. Later in the year King Crimson recorded and released a new album, Islands. The band's warmest-sounding record to date, it was strongly influenced by Miles Davis's orchestral collaborations with Gil Evans and had a loose thematic connection with Homer's Odyssey. It also showed signs of a stylistic divergence between Sinfield and Fripp. Islands also featured the band's one and only experiment with a string ensemble and the raunchy rhythm and blues-inspired Ladies of the Road, by far the closest representation of the band's lifestyle, and probably the only track that the whole band liked. A hint of trouble to come came when one member of the band allegedly described the more delicate and meditative parts of Islands as airy-fairy shit. Following the next tour, Fripp ousted Sinfield claiming musical differences and a loss of faith in his partner's ideas. The remaining band broke up acrimoniously in rehearsals shortly afterwards, due to Fripp's refusal to incorporate other members' compositions into the band's repertoire. The band were persuaded to reform to fulfill their 1972 tour commitments, with the intention of disbanding afterwards. Recordings from this tour were later released as the Earthbound Live album, noted and criticized for its bootleg-level sound quality and a style that occasionally veered towards funk, with scats singing on the improvised pieces. This was a flagrant sign of the musical rift between Fripp and all three of the other members, the latter of whom were attempting to steer the band back towards a rootsier rhythm and blues style in open defiance of Fripp. Despite these problems, relationships across the band gradually improved during the tour to the point where Collins, Burrell and Wallace offered to continue with the band. However, Fripp had already decided to entirely restructure King Crimson with a new musical direction that he felt was entirely unsuited to the current band, and was already recruiting new members. Having spent a long time being critically overshadowed by the preceding and subsequent lineups of King Crimson, the Islands lineup of the band benefited from positive reappraisal in the mid-2000s following the release of several live archive releases and reassessments by Fripp and other band members. Fripp would subsequently mend his damaged relationships with Wallace and Collins, although not with Burrell. King Crimson, Lineup 3. The third major lineup of King Crimson was radically different from the previous two and the interregnum work, being both the first without saxophone or woodwind and the first to embrace active improvisation as a major musical element. Fripp's first new recruit was the free improvising percussionist Jamie Muir, who had previously worked with Sunship and Derek Bailey. In the first of King Crimson's double drummer lineups, he was paired with former Yes drummer Bill Bruford, who had chosen to leave the commercially successful Yes at the peak of their early career in favor of the comparatively unstable and unpredictable King Crimson. Fripp also finally secured John Wetton as King Crimson's singer and bass player, recruiting him directly from Family. The lineup was completed by David Cross, a relatively unknown violinist whom Fripp had encountered through work with music colleges. With Sinfield gone, the band recruited a new lyricist, Wetton's friend Richard Palmer James. Unlike Sinfield, Palmer James played no part in artistic, visual or sonic direction. His sole contributions to King Crimson were his lyrics, sent by post to Wetton from his home in Hamburg. Lax tongues in Aspic, rehearsals and touring began in late 1972, with the new band's penchant for improvisation immediately gaining King Crimson some excited press attention. A new album Lax Tongues in Aspic was released early the next year. This was the first King Crimson record to demonstrate Fripp's dominant compositional vision, without either the template of Ian MacDonald's songwriting and arrangements or the influence of Sinfield's elaborate conceptual lyrics and references, and as such was also the first King Crimson record to escape from the shadow of the debut album. The band's new sound was exemplified by the album's two-part title track a significant change from what King Crimson had done before, drawing from influences as diverse as K, the free music scene, Vaughan Williams and the embryonic heavy metal sound, and featuring a whisper-to-scream dynamic that was extreme even by the band's previous standards. There were some nods to the past in the continued use of Mellotron, as well as in the inclusion of stately ballads, but the band now featured a small ensemble sound with an emphasis on instrumental music. In particular, the record was permeated by Muir's freewheeling approach to percussion and found instrumentation, utilizing everything from a prepared drum kit to bicycle horn bulbs, toys, bulwarers, gongs hit with chains, Foley-style sound effects and a joke laughing bag. Wetton's loud, crisp and overdriven playing style provided King Crimson's most distinctive bass playing to date, while Fripp's guitar playing had taken on a wiry and aggressive character previously seldom heard in the band's studio recordings. Following more touring, the group became a quartet in early 1973 when Muir suddenly departed. This was initially thought to have been due to an on-stage injury a drop gong landing on his foot during a gig at the Marquee. 27 years later it was revealed that Muir had gone through a personal spiritual crisis and had to immediately withdraw from the band, who themselves had not been told the truth about the situation by their management. Bruford took on additional Muir-influenced percussion duties to flesh out the band's sound. Starless and Bible Black. During the lengthy tour that followed, the remaining members assembled material for their next album, Starless and Bible Black. This was released in January 1974, earning them a positive Rolling Stone review. The album built on the achievements of its predecessor, precariously balancing improvised material with careening heavy metal riffs and songs that recalled both the Beatles' White Album experiments and aspects of electric jazz fusion as performed by the Mahavishnu Orchestra and Miles Davis. Two-thirds of the album was instrumental, including Fripp's climactic moto perpetuo composition Fracture, and the eternal sound painting of the title track. For the recording of Trio a hushed and wistful improvised melody featuring Wetton on bass, Cross on violin and Fripp on mellotron flute, Bruford notoriously contributed admirable restraint by sitting with his drumsticks crossed over his chest throughout the piece, understanding that the music did not require him to add anything, and was thus given compositional credit equal to the rest of his bandmates. Although most of Starless and Bible Black had been recorded at live performances, it was painstakingly edited to sound like another studio album. Fuller documentation of the quartet's live work was revealed 18 years later on 1992's four-disc live recording The Great Deceiver, and again on 1997's double live album The Night Watch, which used the original source tapes for much of the material on Starless and Bible Black. By this time, the band were once again beginning to divide into performance factions. Musically, Fripp found himself positioned between Bruford and Wetton, who played with such force and increasing volume that Fripp once compared them to a flying brick wall, and Cross, whose amplified acoustic violin was increasingly being drowned out by the rhythm section, forcing him to concentrate more on keyboards. An increasingly frustrated Cross began to withdraw musically and personally, with the result that he was voted out of the group following the band's 1974 tour of Europe and America, playing his final performance in Central Park in New York. Red, the remaining trio reconvened to record a new album, which would be called Red. Unknown to the other two, Fripp, increasingly disillusioned with the music business, had been turning his attention to the writings of the mystic George Gurdjieff, and experienced a spiritual crisis come awakening immediately before the band entered the studio. He would later describe his experience as having seemed as if the top of my head blew off. Although most of the album material had been written, the transformed Fripp retreated into himself in the studio and withdrew his opinion, leaving Bruford and Wetton to direct most of the sessions. In spite of this, Red proved to be one of the strongest and most consistent King Crimson albums to date. It has been described as an impressive achievement for a group about to disband, with intensely dynamic musical chemistry between the band members. Opening with the harsh, tritone-based instrumental that gave the album its name, the album also featured two relatively short and punchy Wetton-led songs, and a last look back at the period with David Cross via the live improvisation Providence, which was recorded on the preceding tour. The album finale was the majestic 12-minute Starless, which acted, in effect, as a potted musical history of the band, traveling from Mellotron-driven ballad grandeur via intense improvisation to savagely structured metallic attack and back again. Red also included guest appearances by former members and collaborators. In addition to Cross's appearance on Providence, Robin Miller and Mark Charig returned on oboe and cornet respectively for the first time since Islands, and both Mel Collins and Ian MacDonald played saxophones on Starless. With one of their strongest albums ready to promote, King Crimson's future prospects looked bright, and talks were underway regarding Ian MacDonald rejoining the band. However, Fripp did not want to tour as he felt that the world was coming to an end. He was, in any case, becoming discouraged by both the working relationships in the band and by the realities of high-profile rock band activity, which he increasingly saw as overblown and detrimental to both musicians and audience. 2 months before the release of Red, Fripp announced that King Crimson had ceased to exist, and was completely over forever and ever. The group formally disbanded on September 25, 1974. Much later on, it was revealed that Fripp had attempted to interest his managers in a Fripp-free version of King Crimson but had been turned down. USA, a posthumous live album, USA, documenting King Crimson's 1974 tour of the United States, was released in 1975 to critical acclaim, reviewers calling it a must for fans of the band and insanity you're better off having. Technical issues with some of the original tapes rendered some of David Cross' violin parts inaudible when mixed in 1974, so Roxy Music's Eddie Jobson was brought in to provide studio overdubs of violin and keyboards. Further edits were also made to allow for the time limitations of a single vinyl album. The album was issued on CD for the first time in 2005 with 2 extra tracks, Fracture, and Starless. Another reissue came in 2013, consisting of the entire Asbury Park, New Jersey performance, presented as is without the edits and overdubs. First hiatus, between 1975 and 1980, King Crimson was considered to be defunct. In fact, this period turned out to be the first of the band's series of major hiatuses as the members went their separate ways. In 1977, John Wetton and Bill Bruford would briefly reunite in the Crimson-inspired progressive rock band UK. While Wetton would move on to sessions and ultimately to the arena rock band Asia, Bruford then pursued his own jazz rock fusion project for the remainder of the 1970s. He also performed with Genesis for one tour in 1976 as primary drummer. Ian MacDonald, who had nearly rejoined King Crimson after Red, would instead join Foreigner. Robert Fripp would spend a couple of years out of the music industry studying the teachings of Gurdjieff and J. G. Bennett, returning to performance from 1976 onward as a collaborator with David Bowie, Peter Gabriel, Brian Eno and Daryl Hall. During this period he would record his first solo album Exposure and form a 4-piece instrumental beat band called the League of Gentlemen. King Crimson, Line-Up 4, Discipline. By 1981, Fripp had opted to fold the League of Gentlemen in favor of a project that was more artistically and commercially ambitious. At the time, he had no intention of reforming King Crimson. However, his first step was to contact Bill Bruford and ask whether he wanted to join a new band, to which Bruford agreed. Fripp then contacted guitarist and singer Adrian Belew, whom he had met when Belew's band Gaga had supported the League of Gentlemen. Belew was, at the time, a major collaborator with Talking Heads both on record and on tour. Fripp had never been in a band with another guitarist before, other than his stint in Peter Gabriel's 1977 touring band, so the decision to seek a second guitarist was indicative of Fripp's desire to create a sound unlike any of his previous work. Belew would also become the band's lyricist. Having decided against selecting Bruford's colleague Jeff Berlin as bass player, Fripp and Bruford resigned themselves to a long search and began auditioning scores of applicants in New York. On the third day, Fripp absented himself from the auditions after hearing about 3 musicians and returned several hours later accompanied by Tony Levin, who got the job after playing a single chorus of Red. Fripp later confessed that, had he initially known that Levin was available and interested, he would have selected him as first-choice bass player without auditions. In addition to his bass-playing contributions, Levin introduced the band to the use of the Chapman Stick, a 10-string polyphonic two-handed tapping instrument of the guitar family that had both a bass and treble range and that Levin played in an utterly original style. Fripp named the new quartet Discipline, and the band flew to England to rehearse and write. They made their live debut at Mole's Club in Bath on April 30, 1981 and went on to tour the UK, supported by the Lounge Lizards. By October 1981, the 4 members of Discipline had made the collective decision to ditch their original name and to reactivate and use the name of King Crimson. The new version of King Crimson bore some resemblance to new wave music, which can be attributed in part to the work of both Bellew and Fripp with Talking Heads and David Bowie, Levin's work with Peter Gabriel, and Fripp's work on Exposure and with the League of Gentlemen. With this new band, described by J.D. Considine in the new Rolling Stone album guide as having a jaw-dropping technique of not wholly rhythmic, harmonically demanding workouts, Fripp intended to create the sound of a rock gamelan, with an interlocking rhythmic quality to the paired guitars that he found similar to Indonesian gamelan ensembles. Fripp concentrated on playing complex picked arpeggios while Bellew provided a striking arsenal of guitar sounds utilizing a broad range of electronic effects and unorthodox playing styles. Within the rhythm section, Levin brought elements of contemporary urban styles to the bass lines, while Bruford experimented, at Fripp's behest, with a cymbal-free drum kit. As with previous incarnations of the band, the new King Crimson lineup also embraced new technology that in turn informed the music in this case the Roland Guitar synthesizer, the Chapman Stick and the Simmons electronic drum kit. Although King Crimson's trademark Mellotrons were no longer present, Fripp's rich and overdriven lead guitar breaks provided a link to the past, with the new band also having turned in animated versions of Red, and Lax Tongues in Aspic, Part 2 during the original Discipline tour. The first album by the new lineup was 1981's Discipline, an immediate benchmark for the new sound and still considered to be one of the band's finest records. The songs were short and snappy by King Crimson standards, with Bellew's pop sense and quirky lyrical approach a surprising contrast to previous Crimson grandeur. The music incorporated additional influences including post-punk, latter-day funk, go-go and African-styled polyrhythms. While the band's previous taste for improvisation was now tightly reined in, one of the album's 2 instrumentals had emerged unplanned out of group rehearsals. The noisy, half-spoken half-shouted in Discipline had been partially written to give Bruford a chance to escape from the strict rhythmic demands of the rest of the album and to play against the beat in any way that he could. Beat, Discipline was followed in 1982 by Beat, which was both the first King Crimson album to have been recorded with the same band lineup as the album preceding it and the first not to have been produced by a member of the group. The album had a loosely linked theme of the Beat generation and its writings, reflected in song titles such as Neil and Jack and Me, The Howler, and Sartori and Tangier. Fripp had asked Bellew to read Kerouac's novel On the Road for inspiration, and the album was peppered with themes of travel, disorientation and loneliness. While the record was a noticeably popular version of the Discipline template, it also featured the harsh, atonal and entirely improvised Requiem, which was more reminiscent of the left-field work of King Crimson circa Starless and Bible Black. The recording process of Beat was fraught, with Bellew suffering high stress levels over his duties as frontman, lead singer, and main songwriter. On one occasion, he clashed with Fripp and ordered him out of the studio. Fripp would later sardonically comment, "So much for my being the leader of King Crimson." The band's immediate differences were resolved and King Crimson toured again, followed by a recuperative timeout during which Bellew recorded a solo album. 3 of a Perfect Pair, reconvening to record 3 of a Perfect Pair in 1984, the band found the compositional process hard and this time had difficulty reconciling the disparate musical ideas of the four members. They ultimately opted for a two-sided album consisting of the left side a 4 of the band's popular songs and a melodical instrumental a and a right side of experimental material that ranged from extended and atonal improvisations in the tradition of the mid-1970s band to a third tightly structured episode in the Lax Tongues in Aspic sequence. The left side songs had a loose lyrical me this time the workings of the brain, and its impact on life. The right side had more of a preoccupation with technological society, from the lengthy instrumental industry to the Sprixton piece Dig Me, and saw the band experimenting with more mechanistic sounds. The 2001 CD remaster of the album added The Other Side, a collection of remixes and improvisation outtakes plus Levin's tongue-in-cheek vocal piece The King Crimson Barber Shop. The last concert of the Three of a Perfect Pair tour was recorded at the Spectrum Club in Montreal and subsequently released in 1998 as the live album Absent Lovers, Live in Montreal. Second hiatus. Immediately after the Montreal concert, Fripp dissolved King Crimson for the second time, having become dissatisfied with its working methods. Bruford and Bellew expressed some frustration over this. Despite these circumstances, the musicians remained on fairly amicable terms. Bellew would later refer to the band taking a break that ultimately lasted for 10 years. Levin returned to session work. Bellew returned to his solo career. Bruford established and toured the first lineup of his long-running jazz band Earthworks. Fripp concentrated on teaching, via his guitar craft method, although he would also work with David Sylvian between the mid-1980s and early 1990s. King Crimson, Lineup 5. At some point in the early 1990s, Adrian Bellew visited Fripp in England and strongly expressed his interest in playing in a reformed King Crimson. Following the end of his tour with David Sylvian, Fripp began to assemble a new version of the band, bringing Bellew and Levin back from the 1980s lineup while adding Trey Goon on Chapman Stick and Jerry Marotta on drums. In the early stages of planning, Marotta was replaced by Pat Mastilotto. The last addition to the lineup was Bill Bruford as second drummer. Fripp explained the unexpected sextet arrangement by claiming to have had the vision of a double trio to explore a different type of King Crimson music. Bruford, however, would later assert that he had lobbied his own way into the band, believing that King Crimson was very much his gig, and that Fripp had come up with the philosophical explanation later. In his 2009 autobiography, he also revealed that one of the conditions Fripp had imposed upon his rejoining was that Bruford would cede all creative control of the band to Fripp. Vroom and Baum, the double trio convened for rehearsals in Woodstock in 1994 and released the EP Vroom in the same year. This revealed the new King Crimson sound, which featured elements of the interlocking guitars on Discipline and the heavy rock feel of Red, but also involved a greater use of ambient electronic sound and ideas from industrial music. In contrast, many of the actual songs are mostly written or finalized by Bellew displayed stronger elements of 1960s pop than before in particular, a Beatles influence. As with previous lineups, new technology was used for, and informed, the music. In this case, the technology was MIDI, used extensively by Fripp, Bellew and Goon, to which Goon would add the Warr Guitar. The apparent twinning of instruments was, in fact, used less than initially suggested. Using soundscapes, Fripp's guitar took on more of a textural and ambient role in many pieces. Goon's stick and Warr Guitar playing, rather than staying in the bass register with Levin, covered a proportion of the guitar arpeggios and functioned as another lead instrument. The main use of twinned instrumentation was in the drumming. Bruford initially took on a more exploratory role over Mastilotto's steady beat, but this soon shifted toward a more equitable sharing of percussive roles. The revived band made its concert debut in Buenos Aires September 28, 1994. The October concerts were released as the live album Baum, Live in Argentina in August 1995. In addition to a large body of new material, the band played 3 mid-1970s pieces and 6 songs from the 1980s repertoire, predominantly from Discipline. Throok and Throok. King Crimson released their next full-length studio album, Throok, in April 1995. containing revised versions of most of the tracks on Vroom. Fripp was described by reviewers as having jazz-centered rock structures, characterized by noisy, angular, exquisite guitar interplay, and an athletic, ever-inventive rhythm section, whilst being in tune with the sound of alternative rock musicians in the mid-1990s. Examples of the band's efforts to integrate their multiple elements could be heard on the complex post-prog songs Dinosaur and Sex Sleep Eat Drink Dream, as well as the more straightforward One Time and the funk-pop-inspired People. Instrumentally, the album featured a couple of clear descendants of the Driving Red, the drum duet Baum, the savagely displaced and rhythmic THRAK, and a couple of brief solo soundscapes from Fripp. The album also featured the brief return of Mellotron to the band's sonic palette. During 1995 and 1996, King Crimson continued to tour. In 1996, the band released the challenging avant-garde live album Thrakatak, which consisted entirely of concert improvisations from the midsection of performances of THRAK, digitally combined into an hour-long extended improvisation. A more conventional live recording from the period was later made available on the 2001 double CD release Vroom Vroom, as was a 1995 concert on the 2003 DAR copyright Jar Vroom DVD. Although musically exciting, the double trio was expensive and cumbersome to run, which in turn led to insecurity. In mid-1997, the band gathered for rehearsals in Nashville that came to a compositional impasse in which none of the generated material appeared to satisfy Fripp. At this point, the friction between Fripp and a particularly exasperated Bruford effectively ended the latter's time as a King Crimson member. Bruford would later comment, "By now, Robert and I couldn't even agree where to have dinner. And if you can't agree that, you sure as heck can't play together." This, plus the lack of workable material and coherent group ideas, could have broken the band up altogether. Instead, the six members opted for an alternative solution, the ProjeKCts. ProjeKCts 1X. Rather than split up absolutely, the six musicians of the double trio decided to work in smaller subgroups, or fractalizations, according to Fripp, called ProjeKCts. This enabled the group to continue developing musical ideas and searching for Crimson's next direction without the practical difficulty and expense of convening all six members in one place at once. As with previous King Crimson endeavors, the ProjeKCts embraced new technology, in this case, Mastilotto's electronic drum loop devices, Tragoon's MIDI triggered talkbox, and the new electronic Roland V-Drums played by both Mastilotto and Billy. Various King Crimson members have continued to create new ProjeKCts up until the present day, as and where necessary. The first four ProjeKCts played live in the US, Japan and the UK during 1998 and 1999 and released a number of recordings that were in many respects similar to the Thrakatak album, demonstrating a high degree of free improvisation. These have been collectively described by music critic Considine as frequently astonishing, but also as lacking in melody, and thus too difficult for the casual listener. ProjeKCT 1 assembled for a 4-night stint in London. The band took on an entirely improvised free jazz direction and was primarily led by the more jazz-inclined Bruford and Levin. This can also be seen as Bruford's final attempt to work within a King Crimson context. ProjeKCT 2 explored more crime-sonic instrumental structures with plenty of MIDI triggering and virtual instrumentation, plus the unusual and stimulating element of Billy playing electronic drums rather than guitar. The music was generally more light-hearted and humorous than most King Crimson-associated material. ProjeKCT 3 explored similar territory to ProjeKCT 2 but was a much faster-paced experiment driven primarily by Mastilotto's multi-layered electronic rhythm approach. ProjeKCT 4 explored similar territory to ProjeKCT 3, although it actually preceded ProjeKCT 3 into action. However, the presence of Levin on bass and stick resulted in a much fuller live band sound and a more driving avant-rock approach. ProjeKCts a studio-only rearrangement of the 2000 King Crimson lineup, with composition and ideas led by the rhythm section rather than by Fripp and Billy. King Crimson, lineup 6. By the time the ProjeKCts came to an end, Bruford had entirely left the King Crimson world to fully embrace his jazz work with Earthworks and others. Levin's session career commitments mostly to Peter Gabriel and Seal were also obstructing future King Crimson activity. Fortunately, Levin's lack of availability suited Bellew's preference for working with a smaller unit following the logistical challenges of the double trio, and it was decided that Levin could withdraw amicably from the band for the moment. The remaining 4 active members of King Crimson Bellew, Fripp, Goon, and Mastelotto continued with the band, sometimes referring to themselves as the Double Duo in a tongue-in-cheek reference to the previous lineup. Despite featuring 2/3 of the previous band's personnel, this incarnation of the band would be strongly distinct from the double trio and was effectively a different, rather than reduced, lineup. The altered membership and the experience of the projects led to changes in role. Goon began to concentrate on the bass register for his Warr Guitar playing, and added work on the baritone guitar and Ashbury silicone string bass guitar. Mastelotto made a much greater use of electronics. Once again, new technology was employed, while Bellew took the additional step of entirely embracing Fripp's new standard tuning on guitar. The Construction of Light, King Crimson recorded their next album, The Construction of Light, in Adrian Bellew's basement and garage near Nashville. The results were released in 2000 and proved to be the band's most hard-rocking album to date. All of the pieces were metallic and harsh in sound, similar to the work of contemporary alternative metal bands such as Tool, with a distinct electronic texture, a heavy, processed drum sound from Mastelotto, and a different take on the interlocked guitar sound that the band had used since the 1980s. With the exception of a parodic industrial blues, sung by Bellew through a voice changer, under the pseudonym of Hooter J. Johnson, the songs were unrelentingly complex and challenging to the listener, with plenty of rhythmic displacement to add to the harsh textures. The album also contained a lengthy 4th installment of the Lax Tongues in Aspic series and another piece, Fractured, which effectively rewrote the 1973 piece Fracture. Fripp argued that the original Fracture had been written for and interpreted by a specific group of musicians, and that to pursue a similar theme in 2000 it had been necessary to rewrite the music in accordance with the skills and personalities of the current lineup. This explanation, however, did not protect the album from criticism for apparently lacking new ideas. Although the whole band contributed to arrangements, the basic material on The Construction of Light was almost entirely composed by Bellew and Fripp. To avoid creative frustration, the band recorded a parallel album at the same time under the name of ProjeKCts, called Heaven and Earth. This second album was conceived and led by Mastelotto and Goon and was a further development of the polyrhythmic dance music approach seen earlier in the ProjeKCts. The album's title track was also included as a bonus track on The Construction of Light. Like The Construction of Light, Heaven and Earth was criticized for an apparent lack of new ideas. King Crimson toured to support the records, releasing a live document of the results as the triple live album Heavy Construction. This showed the band constantly switching between the structured album pieces and ferocious project-style soundscape and percussion improvisations. Among King Crimson's live engagements were shows opening for self-confessed Crimson disciples Tool in 2001. At one of these, Tool's lead singer Maynard James Keenan joked on stage, "For me, being on stage with King Crimson is like Lenny Kravitz playing with Led Zeppelin, or Britney Spears on stage with Debbie Gibson." Former Led Zeppelin bassist John Paul Jones also performed in some live shows, most notably at the Gothic Theatre in Denver, Colorado, Level 5 and Happy with What You Have to Be Happy With. 21st Century Schizoid Band. Later in 2001, the band released a limited edition live EP called Level 5, which featured 3 new pieces. A version of The Deception of the Thrush, a project track now regularly featuring in the live set, plus the new tracks Dangerous Curves and Virtuous Circle suggested that the band was heading back towards a broader dynamic including quieter, more textural work. In 2002, King Crimson released another EP Happy with What You Have to Be Happy With. This featured 11 tracks and confirmed that the band were moving back towards greater diversity. Half of the tracks were brief processed vocal snippets sung by Bellew, and the songs themselves varied between gamelan pop, soundscapes and slightly parodic takes on heavy metal and blues. In keeping with the band's creative stance, King Crimson continued to ignore almost all of their 1960s and 1970s material while continuing to tour and record new music. However, several former King Crimson members joined forces in the 21st Century Schizoid Band. Active between 2002 and 2004, this project engaged in several tours to revive and play King Crimson material drawn from the band unregistered trademark's 1969 debut In the Court of the Crimson King through to 1975's Red. The 21st Century Schizoid Band featured Ian MacDonald, Mel Collins, Peter Giles and Michael Giles. It was fronted by ProjeKCts, a singer-songwriter and guitarist, as well as Michael Giles' son-in-law, who had previous history with 64 Spoons, The Lodge, Level 42 and various Henry Cow and Canterbury scene-related projects. The Power to Believe, Level 5 and Happy with What You Have to Be Happy With both acted as work-in-progress reveals for King Crimson's 2003 album The Power to Believe, which Fripp described as the culmination of 3 years of crimsonizing. The album incorporated reworked and/or retitled versions of Deception of the Thrush, and 4 of the EP tracks, plus a 1997 soundscape with added instrumentation and vocals, and also used lyrics from an Adrian Belews solo song as a linking theme across 4 songs. It did, however, confirm the band's return to more diverse songwriting and instrumentation, with a greater reliance on space and soundscapes and with Mastilotto using more project-style percussion textures. Songs such as Electric fused 1970s, 1980s and 21st Century Crimson styles, and the album ran the gamut from metal to ambient. Once again, the band toured to support the album, resulting in the 2003 live album Electric, Live in Japan, recorded in Tokyo. In late November 2003, Trigun announced his departure from King Crimson. He would continue his active association with Mastilotto in projects such as TU and KTU, as well as leading his own band. Tony Levin was subsequently reinstalled as King Crimson's bass player, reconvening with Fripp, Belews and Mastilotto for rehearsals in early 2004. However, following the rehearsals King Crimson was placed on hold for another 3 years, although the band did not formally split up. By this point, Fripp was continually reassessing his desire to work with King Crimson in view of his dislike of the music industry and what he saw as the unsympathetic aspects of the life of a touring musician. Third hiatus and related projects. While King Crimson remained inactive, various members ensured that the band unregistered trademark's music remained in play. Fripp concentrated mostly on solo work and guest appearances, but briefly teamed up with Belews in ProjeKCts, which played 4 shows in the northeastern United States in 2006. Belews formed his own power trio, with whom he performed both solo songs and several King Crimson songs from his own stints in the band. From 2007, Levin and Mastilotto played together in their Stickmen trio with stick player Michael Bernier, which included several King Crimson songs and instrumentals in live sets and on albums. Mastilotto also joined forces with Reuter in the experimental duo Tuner. King Crimson, Lineup 7. A new King Crimson lineup was announced in late 2007, consisting of Fripp, Belews, Levin, Mastilotto, and a new second drummer Gavin Harrison. Although best known as the drummer for Porcupine Tree, Harrison had a formidable reputation as one of the best session drummers in the music industry and had had a long career including work with Level 42, The Lodge, ProjeKCts, Sam Brown and innumerable others. The new 5-man lineup began rehearsals in spring 2008. In August of the same year, the band set out on a brief 4-city tour in preparation for the group's 40th anniversary in 2009. Live, the band revealed an increasingly drum-centric direction but no new material or any extended improvisations. However, many of the pieces from the back catalogue received striking new arrangements, most notably the renditions of Neurotica, Sleepless, and Level 5, all of which were given percussion-heavy overhauls, presumably to highlight the return to the dual-drummer format. On August 20, 2008, JMNIV issued a download-only release of the 7th August 2008 concert in Chicago. More rehearsals and shows had been intended for 2009, but these were cancelled following scheduling clashes with various members' other projects. King Crimson immediately began another hiatus pending further developments. In September 2008, Bellew, Levin and Mastilotto teamed up with Eddie Jobson and Eric Slick to play a short Crimson-related set at a Russian festival under the name of a OE Crimson Projector Euro. Fourth hiatus. While all King Crimson members kept themselves busy with other projects, Adrian Bellew in particular continued to lobby for reviving the band. He discussed the state of the band with Fripp on several occasions over the course of 2009 and 2010. In June 2010, he suggested a temporary reunion of the 1980s King Crimson Quartet for a 30th anniversary tour. The reunion idea was politely turned down by Bruford and Fripp, with Bruford commenting, "It's precisely because I love the 80s band so much that I would be highly unlikely to try to recreate the same thing, a mission I fear destined to failure," while Fripp pleaded commitment to other activities and commented that he would rather spend his energies toward new music, although not in the near future. On December 5, 2010, Fripp wrote a diary entry on his DGM website outlining his current stage of involvement in the music industry. The diary entry suggested that the King Crimson switch had been set to off, and detailed a number of reasons why he was not currently interested in performing or writing with the band. In 2010, a series of improvised guitar duets by Fripp and ProjeKCts eventually led to a fuller song-based project, released in 2011 as the album A Scarcity of Miracles. Credited to Jack Syke Fripp Collins, the album band featured Jack Syke, Fripp and Mel Collins as main players and composers, with Tony Levin on bass guitar, Chapman Stick and Gavin Harrison on drums. At one point, Fripp referred to the band as P7, although unlike previous projects it was based around fully finished and carefully crafted original songs. The project did not tour or release another album, but inspired speculation amongst King Crimson fans as to whether this was a new lineup of the main band under another name. Also in 2011, the 2008 Crimson Project was superseded by the Crimson Project, a six-piece band fusing stickmen with the Adrian Bellew power trio. This band went on to increasingly take charge of live performances of the main King Crimson repertoire, and continues to tour and release live recordings up until the present day. On August 3, 2012, in an interview with the Financial Times published on August 3, 2012, Fripp formally announced his retirement from the music industry, leaving the future of King Crimson uncertain. In the event, his retirement would last for less than a year. King Crimson, Lineup 8. On September 6, 2013, Fripp unexpectedly announced King Crimson's return to work with a new lineup, stating that this is a very different reformation to what has gone before, 7 players, 4 English and 3 American, with 3 drummers. The 7-headed beast of Crim is in go mode. Fripp has cited several reasons for King Crimson's return, varying from the practical to the whimsical. "I was becoming too happy. Time for a pointed stick." The new lineup formally ended Adrian Bellew's 32-year tenure as King Crimson's frontman, as he was not invited to rejoin the band. The current band consists of 4 musicians from the previous 2009 lineup plus new frontman ProjeKCts, Mel Collins, and Bill Rieflin. Collins is a returning King Crimson member, having previously played in the band's 1971 lineup. Rieflin is a multi-instrumentalist who has previously played drums for Ministry and others. The new lineup encompasses the Jack Syke-fronted team which recorded A Scarcity of Miracles 2 years previously, but has not been revealed whether any new King Crimson materials or approaches will have any continuity with the Scarcity material. In a September 2013 diary entry, Fripp provided some hints regarding the new lineup's musical approach. The point of Crim's seeing was of a conventional backliner Gavin Harrison, Bill Rieflin, Tony Levin and Pat Mastilotto, reconfigured as the front line, with Mel Collins, ProjeKCts and myself as backline. In a brief interview with Uncut magazine in March 2014, Fripp revealed that King Crimson had no current plans to make studio recordings but would instead play reconfigured versions of existing band material. Due to outstanding individual commitments, King Crimson will not be performing live until late 2014. In the March Uncut interview, Fripp confirmed further live plans. The first performance will take place in either North or South America. There will be rehearsals primarily in England, and the final batch of rehearsals will most likely be in America in August or September 2014. There is a plan to include the UK in the tour dates, but it depends on a number of circumstances. Right now the primary geographical focus is the United States. The first shows featuring the new formation were announced for September 2014 in New York City. Maintaining King Crimson's work, since the early 2000s, several bands containing former, recent or current King Crimson members have toured and recorded, performing King Crimson music. Active between 2002 and 2004, the 21st Century Schizoid Band reunited several former King Crimson members who'd played on the band's first 4 albums. Fronted by guitarist-singer ProjeKCts, the band also featured Ian MacDonald, Mel Collins, Peter Giles and Michael Giles. The band engaged in several tours, played material from the band's 1960s and 1970s catalogue, and recorded several live albums. Since 2007, Tony Levin has led the trio Stick Men, also featuring Pat Mastilotto and Chapman Stick player Michael Bernier. This band includes and interprets King Crimson compositions in their live sets. Reuter and Mastilotto also play together as the duo Tuner, who have been known to rework the mid-80s King Crimson instrumental industry live. During his solo career Adrian Belew has performed versions of certain King Crimson songs written predominantly by himself, such as Dinosaur, as well as ensemble pieces like Frame by Frame, and Neurotica. In 2011, a band called Jack Fripp Collins released an album called A Scarcity of Miracles. The band featured ProjeKCts, Robert Fripp and Mel Collins as main players and composers, with Tony Levin and Gavin Harrison covering bass guitar, Chapman Stick and drums respectively. At one point, Fripp referred to the band as P7. Unusually for a project, it was based around fully finished and carefully crafted original songs. For a while, King Crimson fans debated whether this was a new lineup of the main band under another name. However, the project did not tour or release another album. Since 2008, a band called either Crimson Project or Crimson Project has increasingly taken charge of the King Crimson repertoire in live performance. The initial Crimson Project lineup formed in September 2008 to play a short set at a Russian festival. In 2011 this lineup was superseded by Crimson Project, a 6-piece band which effectively fused the Adrian Belew power trio with Stick Men. This band continues to perform King Crimson material live and to release live recordings. Musical style and influences: music sourced from outside the rock canon. The band's music was initially grounded in the rock of the 1960s, especially the acid rock and psychedelic rock movements. The band played Donovan's Get Thy Bearings in concert, and were known to play the Beatles' Lucy in the Sky with Diamonds in their rehearsals. However, for their own compositions, King Crimson largely stripped away the blues-based foundations of rock music and replaced them with influences derived from classical composers. The first incarnation of King Crimson played the Mars section of Gustav Holst's suite The Planets as a regular part of their live set, and Fripp has frequently cited the influence of Bach copyright La Barter Cubed K. As a result of this influence, In the Court of the Crimson King is frequently viewed as the nominal starting point of the symphonic rock or progressive rock movements. From its earliest years, King Crimson also initially displayed strong jazz influences, most obviously on its signature track 21st Century Schizoid Man. The band also drew on English folk music for compositions such as Moonchild, and I Talk to the Wind. The 1981 reunion of the band brought in even more elements, displaying the influence of gamelan music and of late 20th century classical composers such as Philip Glass, Steve Reich, and Terry Riley. For its 1994 reunion, King Crimson reassessed both the mid-1970s and 1980s approaches in the light of new technology, intervening music forms such as grunge, and further developments in industrial music, as well as expanding the band's ambient textural content via Fripp's soundscapes looping approach. Compositional approaches: several King Crimson compositional approaches have remained constant from the earliest versions of the band to the present. These include the use of a gradually building rhythmic motif. These include the Devil's Triangle, 1973's The Talking Drum, 1984's Industry, and 2003's Dangerous Curves. An instrumental piece in which the band plays an ensemble passage of considerable rhythmic and polyrhythmic complexity. An early example is the band's initial signature tune 21st Century Schizoid Man, but the Lax Tongues in Aspic series of compositions go deeper into polyrhythmic complexity, delving into rhythms that wander into and out of general synchronization with each other, but that all finish together through polyrhythmic synchronization. These polyrhythms were particularly abundant in the band's 1980s work, which contained gamelan-like rhythmic layers and continual overlaid staccato patterns in counterpoint. The composition of difficult solo passages for individual instruments, such as the guitar break on Fracture on Starless and Bible Black. Pieces with a loud, aggressive sound akin to heavy metal music. The juxtaposition of ornate tunes and ballads with unusual, often dissonant noises. The use of improvisation. Ascending note structure. Improvisation. King Crimson have incorporated improvisation into their performances and studio recordings from the beginning, some of which has been embedded into loosely composed pieces such as Moonchild, or Thrice. Most of the band's performances over the years have included at least one stand-alone improvisation where the band simply started playing and took the music wherever it went, sometimes including passages of restrained silence, as with Bill Bruford's contribution to the improvised trio. The earliest example of an unambiguously improvising King Crimson on record is the spacious, oft criticized extended coda of Moonchild from In the Court of the Crimson King. Rather than using the standard jazz or blues jamming format for improvisation, King Crimson improvisation is a group affair in which each member of the band is able to make creative decisions and contributions as the music is being played. Individual soloing is largely eschewed. Each musician is to listen to each other and to the group sound, to be able to react creatively within the group dynamic. A slightly similar method of continuous improvisation was initially used by King Crimson's jazz fusion contemporaries Weather Report. Fripp has used the metaphor of white magic to describe this process, in particular when the method works particularly well. Similarly, King Crimson's improvised music is rarely jazz or blues-based, and varies so much in sound that the band has been able to release several albums consisting entirely of improvised music, such as the Thrice album. Occasionally, particular improvised pieces will be recalled and reworked in different forms at different shows, becoming more and more refined and eventually appearing on official studio releases. Influence on other bands. King Crimson have been influential both on the early 1970s progressive rock movement and numerous contemporary artists. First-wave progressive rock bands such as Genesis and Yes were directly influenced by the band's initial style of symphonic mellotron rock, and many King Crimson band members went on to other notable bands, Greg Lake to Emerson, Lake and Palmer. Ian MacDonald to co-found Foreigner. Boz Burrell to Bad Company and John Wetton to the supergroups UK and Asia. Some aspects of the work of Emerson, Lake and Palmer can be seen as Greg Lake's attempt to continue the early work of King Crimson. The veteran Canadian hard rock progressive rock band Rush cites King Crimson as a strong early influence on their sound. Latter-day progressive rock bands also cite King Crimson as an influence. These include Porcupine Tree who, as with Tool, have invited King Crimson to play as their support band. Progressive heavy metal rock band Between the Buried and Me are heavily influenced by King Crimson, covering the song 3 of A Perfect Pair on their 2006 album The Anatomy of, as are Primus, whose Les Claypool routinely opened his 2002 tour concerts of Colonel Les Claypool's Fearless Flying Frog Brigade with a cover of the song Thela Hun Gingit. Progressive rock metal band Dream Theater included a cover of King Crimson's Lark's Tongues in Aspic, PT2 on Disc 2 of the special edition of their 2009 release, Black Clouds and Silver Linings. King Crimson's influence extends to alternative rock bands of the 1990s and 2000s. Nirvana are known to have been influenced by King Crimson as a result of Kurt Cobain having mentioned the importance of the Red Album to him. Tool are widely held to have been heavily influenced by King Crimson, with their vocalist Maynard James Keenan even joking on a tour with them that now you know who we ripped off. Just don't tell anyone, especially the members of King Crimson. Los Angeles punk band Bad Religion quotes the lyrics of 21st Century Schizoid Man in their hit single 21st Century. Steve Steele mentioned in an interview that King Crimson was a prime influence on his songwriting and arrangements, and in a biography, he cites that other than traditional literary sources, Richard Palmer James is one of the only lyricists he credits as having a personal impact. King Crimson have frequently been cited as pioneers of progressive metal. Members of both Iron Maiden and Mudvayne have cited King Crimson as an influence. The angular, dissonant guitar patterns associated with Fripp's distinctive approach are also evident in the music of thrash metal pioneers Voivod, especially in the band's mid-period work. Voivod also did a cover of 21st Century Schizoid Man on their 1997 recording Phobos. King Crimson have also provided source material and inspiration for hip-hop and dance music acts. Rap star Kanye West sampled King Crimson's 21st Century Schizoid Man on his 2010 single Power, and British hip-hoppers The Brotherhood used a prominent sample from Starless to open their debut album. British techno house music act Opus 3 covered I Talk to the Wind on their 1992 album Mind Fruit and released the track as a single. King Crimson has also influenced the Japanese noise artist Metsubo, who has stated his passion for the progressive genre and among those King Crimson, and has influenced several tracks on both his solo career as well as his collaborations, like taking samples from The Great Deceiver for a track on Spiral Honey, while in collaboration with the Japanese band Boris released Walrus Groon, where they take the name from one of Crimson's improvisational pieces called Groon. Personnel. The most recently announced lineup of King Crimson is Robert Fripp Euro guitars, guitar synthesizer MIDI guitar, soundscapes. In previous lineups, has also played Mellotron, assorted keyboards, devices, allsets, and sundry implements. Mel Collins Euro saxophones, flutes, bass flute. In previous lineups, has also played Mellotron and sang backing vocals. Tony Levin Euro bass guitars, Chapman Stick, upright bass, backing vocals. In previous lineups, has also played synthesizer. Pat Mastelotto Euro acoustic and electronic drums and percussion. Gavin Harrison Euro drums, Jacko Jacksyke Euro guitars, lead vocals. Bill Riflin Euro drums, synthesizer, backing vocals. This formation was announced in September 2013, and Fripp has announced their first shows won't be able to take place until September 2014. King Crimson has had 21 musicians pass through its ranks as full band members. Many others have collaborated with the band at various points in lyric writing, studio recordings, and live performances. Most of the band members had notable musical careers outside the band, to the extent that it has been calculated that there are over 1,500 releases on which members and former members of King Crimson appear. Robert Fripp has been the sole consistent member of King Crimson throughout the group's history. He has stated that he does not necessarily consider himself the band's leader and instead describes King Crimson as a way of doing things. Fripp has also noted that he never originally intended to be seen as the head of the group. However, Fripp has strongly dominated the band's musical approach and compositional approach since their second album. Trey Gunn, who played with the group between 1994 and 2003, has stated that King Crimson is Robert's vision. Period. Since 1997, band hiatuses, collective creative stallings or other periods of inactivity have led by a series of related bands or collaborations called projects in which crime-sonic ideas have been explored. All of these have included Fripp, with the exception of the current Crimson project. Former members: Peter Senfield Euro lyrics, synthesizer, illumination, artwork. Greg Lake Euro bass guitar, lead vocals. Michael Giles Euro drums, percussion, backing vocals. Ian MacDonald Euro flutes, saxophones, clarinet, bass clarinet, mellotron, keyboards, vibraphone, backing vocals. Gordon Haskell Euro bass guitar, lead vocals. Andy McCulloch Euro drums, Ian Wallace Euro drums, percussion, backing vocals. Boz Burrell Euro bass guitar, lead vocals. Choreography: Bill Bruford Euro acoustic and electronic drums and percussion. John Wetton Euro bass guitar, lead vocals. Occasional piano, guitar and lyrics. David Cross Euro violin, viola, mellotron. electric piano, keyboards, flute, Jamie Muir various percussion, drums, alsets, Adrian Bellew guitars, lead vocals, guitar synthesizer MIDI guitar, electronic percussion, lyrics, occasional drums, Triguna Warr Guitar, Chapman Stick, baritone guitar, Ashbury silicone string bass, backing vocals, talker, additional guest musicians, Keith Tippett acoustic and electric pianos on In the Wake of Poseidon, Lizard and Islands, Peter Giles bass guitar on In the Wake of Poseidon, Mark Charig cornet on Lizard, Islands and Red, Robin Miller oboe and corongle on Lizard, Islands and Red. Nick Evans trombone on Lizard, John Anderson guest lead vocals on Lizard, Rick Kemp bass guitar, played for 2 weeks in band before vocalist Boz Burrow was taught to play the instrument, Harry Miller double bass on Islands, Paulina Lucas soprano vocals on Islands, uncredited musicians strings on Islands, Hunter MacDonald synthesizer and engineering on Earthbound, Richard Palmer James lyrics on Lax Tongues in Aspic, Starless and Bible Black and Red, uncredited musician cello on Red, Eddie Jobson violin and electric piano studio overdues on USA, Margaret Bellew source text for Indiscipline, and lyrics for Two Hands, Timeline. Personnel/album chart, discography. Studio albums, In the Court of the Crimson King, In the Wake of Poseidon, Lizard, Islands, Lax Tongues in Aspic, Starless and Bible Black, Red, Discipline, Beat, Three of a Perfect Pair, THRAK, The Construction of Light, The Power to Believe, reissues. In 1999, Robert Fripp collaborated with Virgin Records on a gradual reissue of the complete pre-1994 King Crimson catalog. Various definitive editions followed. DGM announced details of the first 3 reissues in the revamping of the King Crimson back catalog, released starting in September and October 2009 as CD/DVD editions. Stephen Wilson of Porcupine Tree had been working on these over the past year, restoring the multi-track tapes from the best possible sources, remixing the albums into 5.1 surround sound, mixing unreleased tracks and alternate takes from the master tapes for the first time, and in some cases also creating new stereo mixes that enhance the sonics of the originals significantly. All of this work has been personally overseen by Robert Fripp, who also took part in the stereo remixing. The first 3 titles are Red, In the Court of the Crimson King, and Lizard. October 2010 saw reissues of In the Wake of Poseidon and Islands. October 2011 saw reissues of Starless and Bible Black and Discipline. October 2012 saw reissue of Lark's Tongues in Aspic. October 2013 saw reissue of Live Album USA. Further reissues in the works include THRAK, with engineering by Jacko Jacksyke, Beat and Three of a Perfect Pair. See also, King Crimson at Wikipedia Books, References, Buckley, Peter. The Rough Guide to Rock. London, Rough Guides. ISBN A1-85828-201-2. Notes. External links, Discipline Global Mobile Live, Crimson Jazz Trio, Elephant Talk, Discography, King Crimson and the Marquee Club, ProjeKCts, LinkedIn Group King Crimson Discography at Discogs, King Crimson on MySpace.